You can say it.
You can see.
Cool.
All right.
Welcome, folks. Satish, all yours.
Welcome everyone. Thank you for spending the next hour or so with us, and we hope to make it worth your while. So the session is called Responsible Tech: Avoiding the Slippery Slope of Unintended Consequences. And hopefully through the course of the session, we hope to give you a flavor of what are some of the possible things that can go wrong, and what are some of the things that you could possibly do about it if you're a technologist. Yeah. Then go to the next slide, quick. Yeah, so I think Tanmay has already introduced us. I think we can probably skip the slide. So here's what we're going to talk about, right? And we'll first start off with, why should you care about this? Why responsible tech and why now? And then to kind of drive home the point, we will talk a little bit, or we'll tell you some stories, and hopefully you'll be able to relate to why this is something for us to care about. And then we will speak a little bit about what our industry is doing about it. And then we will probably end with a little bit of information about what ThoughtWorks particularly is doing in the space, and hope to leave you with some reflections, and also some specific things that you may want to do and think about if you're a technologist, and what it is that you can do today if you see some warning signs happening in the tech that you're building. Yeah. And yeah, so why responsible tech? So notice we didn't say what is responsible tech, and we'll probably come to that in a minute. But before that, I think we would like to understand why responsible tech, right? So I think it's probably a cliche to say that we are probably at a point where technology is really at the center of everything that we do, right? And I think it's also fair to say that no longer is technology just something that's a business enabler, but increasingly technology is becoming the business, right? It doesn't matter if you are a traditional brick and mortar firm or a digital native firm. Technology is probably going to be something that you care about deeply as a business, because in many cases that is probably core to whatever it is that you do, right? And as technologists, we do have the responsibility to think quite deeply about the tech that we are building, right? And we need to do that not only because it plays such a significant part in not only our lives, but the lives of a lot of people that we know and care about. But more importantly, it also the kind of tech that we build also represents the values that we stand for, right? And as individuals, I think it's important for us to stand for a certain type of values, right? So are we thinking deeply enough about the tech that we build and the values that it embodies? Right. And then you might say, okay, so that's on the individual front, right? So that's why I, as a technologist, should care about. But you might ask, how relevant is it to a business, right? I mean, if you say you're working for a services firm, and you work for a client's project, so should you really care about that? Or maybe you're working for a product firm and you're building technology that helps serve other customers, or maybe you're working for a firm and you're part of an internal IT team. Do you need to care about responsible tech? I think the answer, is probably an unambiguous yes. And the reason is that, not only are business leaders looking beyond, traditional metrics like, just the financial metrics, like profits and revenue and so on and so forth, but they are being, I would say, not forced. I mean, maybe some are forced, but many of them are increasingly being asked to think about factors that just beyond the financial bottom line by other stakeholders that they care deeply about, right? Like customers, for example, and investors, right? And there are probably many stories that you could come up with where corporations have taken a hit because maybe some unethical practice that they have followed has come back, or something that they thought was harmless but turns out having a huge impact on the on the work and their customers and so on. So people are being forced to think about the technology that they do, right? And so the responsible usage of technology, I think, is becoming increasingly an imperative. So what is responsible tech, right? And before attempting to give a definition, and I promise you a definition is coming, or at least one definition of it is coming, it's probably helpful to think about this as a spectrum of different things, right? And these are probably things that you may know and probably intuitively understand as well, right? So if you look at the picture, on the top are things like security and legal and compliance, right? And these are in other words things that you need to do it, otherwise you as a business will not exist for long, right? Either you may be behind bars or you may not have customers any longer, right? And none of which are good for your business, right? So these are things that are business imperatives for you to do. So those are at the top end of the spectrum. And if you go kind of below the line, you have things that are much more holistic and broad-based and so on and so forth. And we'll probably try and give you a sense of what these mean, but intuitively looking at the terms, you probably understand that equitable tech essentially means building technology that helps everybody regardless of their ability to pay, or tech that does not discriminate based on whether you live in a developed Western country or a developing low and middle income country in Africa or in India, right? It also thinks about things like ethical and humane technology. So for example, if there is a possibility of building a particular piece of tech that may benefit a few people, but maybe irreparably harm thousands of other people, is that something that you need to be building, right? And then as we get closer to the line, or the line, of course the line should actually be a fuzzy one, I think, because nothing here we're talking is like black and white, right? It's all shades of gray. You have things like hostile tech, and then on the other side you have doing responsible and versus irresponsible tech, right? And we'll probably talk about examples of each of these, but say if you're building a feature that keeps users on your site longer, but maybe causes them mental health issues, is that something that you need to be building? Or for example, you're not careful enough in building a feature and that unwittingly leaks sensitive information about some part of your user base. Are those things that you need to be carrying out, right? So I think that's broadly the different lenses that we'd apply. And like I said, there are no clear lines or separations between the two, and these are probably broadly overlapping and fairly fuzzy as you move from one to the other. So if we move to the next slide. So what exactly is responsible tech? So this is one definition, and and there are probably many different definitions of this, as you may imagine, because this is a space that people are still actively exploring, and we're really glad that they are. So this is one definition that we've come up with. So it's essentially a way of working that aligns technology and business behavior with society and individuals' interests, right? Seems clear enough, I think, right? I mean, so in other words, you not only are thinking about what it is that you do for your main users or stakeholders, I think what we're saying is that responsible tech actively considers the values, it considers the unintended consequences and positive and negative impacts of technology that is being built, and actively seeks to manage and mitigate and reduce the risk and harm that the tech may bring about, right? So again, probably still fairly abstract, and we hope to help you make a little bit more sense of this through a bunch of examples and stories that we have for you on the succeeding slide. So I'll hand it over here to Gurpreet.
Hello, am I audible clear?
Yes, Gurpreet, loud and clear.
So as Satish mentioned, right, Satish has given you like a quick sort of brief overview of the spectrum that constitutes the responsible tech conversation. And as you would see, there are quite a lot of overlapping lenses and areas. So we thought it would be actually helpful to dive into some real world examples and stories, because those are easier to understand and in many cases much more easier to remember. And then we can come back again and try and draw some inferences from these stories as to what do we think is going on, and what is our responsibility towards the software and solutions that we are building and deploying out to the world. As I share these stories, I'm quite sure that many of you will be able to either relate to them or may have also heard of some of them. And it would be nice if in the Zoom chat, you could share your thoughts and you could also, of course, ask questions. And in the meanwhile, Satish and I will also try and, answer questions and the discussion in the chat itself. It'll be helpful for us to also hear your stories, actually. So the first one that I wanted to talk about was, Rosie. Rosie is actually a South Korean influencer who came to limelight in 2020 and has now been endorsing over 100 brands. And Rosie is about to make close to $1 million every year in revenue from branding. And Rosie has been branding various things, right from beauty products, health products, juices, insurance companies, and automobiles, cars. And if you look at her Instagram profile, you will find that she has over 113,000 followers, which is a pretty big number given the short period of time. But the interesting thing about Rosie is that she doesn't exist. She is not a human, right? It's a virtual person in that sense. And very few people, sort of know about that fact when they're kind of following this. And in a way she is, and I don't know whether she is the right term here to use, but let's just use she for the time being. She is endorsing beauty products for that matter, which are not actually being used by her, right? We know that. She's endorsing insurances that she is definitely not going to make use of. And she will always remain Forever 21, which by itself could be a branding, right, on Forever 21. And I feel like it's Chevrolet, as an example, for their next gen electric vehicles, launched a video ad which you can Google for and see, and it has her as the lead in that particular thing. And I don't think that the ad industry has always used movie stars, and many times we know that they are being paid to endorse something, but there is still a sense of a human that exists there. There is a chance that that human tried out that particular beauty product or that particular watch before they actually participated in the ad. They feel some sense of connection with the brand, even if they are not great vocal advocates of the brand outside it. They would still not likely endorse something that they feel is ethically incorrect or they don't believe it. But in this case, it seems all stakes are off, and it could get very risky as this technology matures. Another example that there is a high chance that most of you have seen is this website, which is called thispersondoesnotexist.com. And every time you go to this website and you refresh a page, The photograph that shows up on that website is of a human that never existed, but the photograph has been artificially, created and generated for you to see. And in a way, the idea of building this kind of a website was to build awareness of the potential, the power of AI as it exists today, the power of tech as it exists today, and the possible uncanny creepiness that you could feel with technology as it matures. And if you have technology that allows you to create such realistic human images and photographs and potentially videos, the chance for misuse is very high. For instance, someone could go ahead and create a LinkedIn profile which shows images of humans that no longer that have never existed, so you can't really find them, follow them. There isn't someone who can even say that my identity has been stolen, because this identity never existed. It's been created, right? And because it is so real, it makes, in our pervasive world where social media, professional networks so common, it makes it even more scary and even more worrisome that you could have technology like this that exists. And I'm sure if you sit down for 15 minutes, you'll be able to come up with much wilder ways of using such technology. And a lot of people are already doing that, and it is going mainstream. And we need to start thinking about its implications and what we could potentially be doing and how are we using it. This is an example of a website called recipeeasily.com that went live on the 1st of March 2021. This was announced on Twitter, where the idea of the website was that you could search recipes across the internet without having to read and waste time on personal stories of recipe authors and where they got the recipe from and whether it was handed down 4 generations, so on and so forth. And they said, hey, listen, we fixed the whole problem of recipes online, and now you can just directly jump to the recipe and you don't have to read all the personal stories and history of other recipe writers, because we've just collated that information for you here. And within a few hours, on the same day, 1st of March, their website, they brought it down because they had such a huge backlash from the community, from their own friends, maybe even families and the general community, that what you're actually doing is unethical, even if it is not illegal, right? And why is it unethical? You're basically minimizing the work that has been done by other recipe authors. You're pulling their ad revenue potentially away because you're pulling their traffic away from their sites to your sites. And you are disrespecting them because the stories are important. There is a cultural angle and there is a personal angle to the recipes. And minimizing it isn't going to take you very far because we are members of the society. There was no legal ramification here. It's been less than 24 hours since they brought it up. But if you go to their website, you will likely see this even today, saying that we are sorry for having brought that up. BBC published a news article on the same day. And I feel it's important that we don't just build technology for this fact that it is possible. A lot of stuff is possible, right? It has to also be a humane angle to what is being built. What is the impact of it on society?
Just because something is possible, does it mean that you do it? I guess is the question.
Right, absolutely. None of the faces on Rosie Graham are real. It is all computer generated. Just to answer a question on the chat, but someone asked, isn't that face real? It's not real. It's computer generated, 100%. Now let's talk about Facebook. Obviously, Facebook has been around for many years, and most of us, to some degree, now know how Facebook makes us feel. Right? Initially, it made you feel very excited and happy about the fact that you could connect to your, college friends, school friends, and later you realize that every time I saw photos of people either purchasing new cars or going on, exotic vacations, a part of you could get a bit jealous or depressed or ambitious or inspired, but it affected us emotionally. But there has been research done by Facebook itself on what has been the impact of Instagram, which is now owned by Facebook, right? And it said that 32% of teenage girls said that when that they felt bad about their bodies, Instagram made them feel even worse. And the fact that depression has increased in teenagers, and these are, people in the society who are not allowed to vote, who are not allowed to drink, who are not allowed to drive, because we believe that only when they reach a certain age, which is usually between 18 to 25, are they mature enough to handle the stress and the complexity of these decisions. But when it comes to social media applications, across the world, in most countries, the age is 13 years. At 13 years of age, you are allowed to open a Facebook account and Instagram account. And in a way, we are ending up giving them technology, likely that they do not know what is the harm that is happening to them because of it. And I mean, if you're a parent and if you tell your kids to drink less Coke, or don't eat Maggie noodles potentially every day, or eat apples or eat fruit, you are already telling them what is potentially right for them. And you're not potentially saying the same thing to someone who's 30 plus, because you're saying, hey, I think you do not yet know what is good for you, how much can you have and what you shouldn't have. And I feel like if we are handing them technology that is known by research now to show that it is harmful to them, I think we are acting irresponsibly here, right? In 2014, and this I got to know only last month, this particular story when I was reading this book, that ThoughtWorks did a massive experiment on over 600,000 people. And I'm not sure, like in 2014, maybe, there.
Facebook did an experiment, not ThoughtWorks.
Yeah, Facebook did. Did I say ThoughtWorks?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah, so Facebook did this experiment on 600,000 people. And the experiment was that they modified the news feed, or like an A/B experiment, right? So they added negative news on a set of people where the news had more negative words and more negative connotation. And then the other set of people, they added more positive centric news, or bright sounding news. And the idea was that they wanted to see, and this is true for news, status updates, and so on. They wanted to see that over a period of a week or two, what is the emotional influence on the audiences. And they found that people who were exposed to negative news ended up actually giving negative status updates, negative, tending towards a negative emotion, whereas the ones who were given positive news actually gave updates which were more positive. And they did this experiment on 600,000 people. There is a high chance that you and me were part of this experiment at that point in time. If we had Facebook in 2014, I did. Is it possible that children were part of this? And in a way, the emotional state of the Facebook users was manipulated for an experiment without them knowing about it or their approval. And the study was published with a university out there. The study is called Experimental Evidence of Mass Scale Emotional Contagion Through Social Networks. And later, there was a huge hue and cry about the fact that how could a study like this, like treat humans as, emotional, as experimental rabbits, and go out and get published. But the interesting thing is, and if you read the Guardian or the Atlantic's article, the interesting finding really here is that people engage much more with social media if their emotional states are in the extreme, which means that you're either feeling too happy or too sad. If what you read makes you emotionally more charged, there is a high chance that you will either like it, or there's a high chance that you will engage with it, you will get angry with it, which means engagement metrics rise as the emotional angle or emotional content rises for people in either directions. Whereas if you keep the news feed boring, in a way, in double quotes, then engagement drops significantly, which means that in general, it is going to be beneficial not just for Facebook, but for generally anyone who's looking at an engagement metric to change the emotional quotient of its readers and therefore increase engagement, and therefore potentially increase ad revenue, or generally, improve their metrics. And that's the slippery slope, right? That we have to really, really watch out for. Let's move to Canada, where, in multiple malls, Cadillac Fairview installed these, video cameras to basically, take a photograph of the people who are going through the mall to basically do a demographic analysis of what kind of footfall are we getting in the malls, to say that, all right, are we seeing a lot of people from, let's say 20 to 30 come in the afternoon from 3 to 5, and then where are they going? And therefore the idea was that how can we reconfigure our mall to showcase the right products for the right set of audience, which by itself is a valid marketing strategy. It is a valid research strategy. But the problem that they did was multifold. One is that the users had no opt out. In a way, the only opt out was don't enter the mall. So as the moment you enter the mall, there is a poster put somewhere on the left hand side on the wall and other places saying that the fact that you're entering our mall means you're giving us implicit consent to take photographs and to do this form of an analysis. Two, the company said, it was actually found out that a lot of the data, biometric data, was actually stored on their servers. And they said that, hey, we didn't plan to store it at all. We were just using it for a biometric computation so that we would get the age and the gender, and then it would get deleted. But they didn't realize that the software system was actually storing all the data and not deleting anything. And this is where the risk comes, right? So yes, maybe it was okay if they were potentially, anonymous, doing an anonymous mapping and just storing the fact that, let's say, a 25-year-old female came into the mall at 5 p.m. Maybe that's okay, because there it's completely anonymous, no one's information is being tracked. But the fact that there aren't enough safeguards in place, the fact that biometric data of people is being stored, and the fact that people do not know about it, and there are no significant checks being put in place, it is worrisome. And it could very well happen to to any one of us, where we are part of a client project where we are asked to use a technology to store this information, to compute this information, but we haven't asked the right questions as to how is the data being used, where is it being stored, how long is it being stored, and what are we doing to safeguard such data. The other thing, the health domain in general, right? It's very complex, and different cultures have different contexts. And many times we don't realize that what is very normal and okay for us is actually not normal and okay in other cultures, in other regions, in other countries, in other continents. And I feel it's important to acknowledge that. Once you acknowledge that, it will become a lot easier then to think of how can we solve for it. So let's look at some examples. In Africa, people with albinism are persecuted, killed, dismembered. Why? Because they believe that such people are cursed and bring bad luck, which means that if a person has this condition, that information needs to stay private. This is not their name, this is not their email address, this is not their phone number, this is not PII data, but this is data that is really, really important for that person to be safeguarded. Same would be true for LGBT and for people with HIV. And it is not just people with HIV, even people helping people with HIV are at risk. Right, as you can see here, not only were the people charged with homosexuality, but the staff of the NGO office itself was also in trouble. And there are many cases in countries where medical records or generally survey records, because they've been digitized, they get that information is captured by the government or by an uprising government or during an ethical conflict. And not just are the people then targeted, but people who are helping these people also get targeted. The laws across countries are different for same-sex Marriages, they are illegal, they are in controversial state in some countries, they're in accepted state in some countries, and this keeps changing as the political and the regional balance shifts. And that is why it is very hard in a way to keep up, to ensure that what we are storing is safe and measured. And therefore for us it is important to take a pessimistic stance and say that maybe this information is going to be risky one day or the other because it is not politically known as green all over the world. Can we question why we are storing this particular data? How is it going to get used? And what ensures that the people whose data we are storing, the information we are storing, they are going to remain safe or not be targeted? And there can be so many different attributes, whether it is skin condition, whether it's HIV or AIDS, whether you have tuberculosis, STDs. We've seen with COVID how people initially got COVID and they have been part of racial targeting and otherwise, whether you're from Asian descent in the US or whether the fact that you just have COVID, like things can change on a spur of a moment. The income, the smoking history, drug history, gender, dietary habits, any of this could potentially be sensitive information. And we don't know when something new becomes sensitive, even though it is not sensitive today, which means that our responsibility goes up even further, that we have to ask the right questions when we are storing different data elements. This is an example of a form, right, where you are sort of capturing health data and asking someone to fill a particular form. And if you see very nicely here, there is the box here says patient identifiable information, and this will not get transmitted to CDC. So this data will get transmitted, but this one will not, which is a good thing. But it is being captured and it is being stored locally, and there is still some possible sensitivity, but the blast radius of this information is not going to go too far. There are other things that are being done. For instance, you could have an encrypted version of a individual's code so that you are saying that is what will get transferred out rather than the original one. And that could help in kind of de-identifying a particular medical record. But if you see, right, the kinds of questions that could get asked as part of an HIV surveillance, this is HIV surveillance, right? It is not confirmed HIV. It is part of an activity to go and check for HIV in a population. The kinds of questions that get asked, most of them are very sensitive, right? Have you had sexual contact with person with unknown serostatus or with an HIV positive person? Is there a suspected STD? Do you have a drug dependency? Have you been tested for drugs? These are all very, very sensitive questions. And this information, obviously, once people give, they're kind of letting go. It's a significant trust that they have on the fact that people will be careful with what happens with this data. This is a photo of Jan Swasthya Sahyog, which is an NGO hospital in Chhattisgarh. Bhamni, the software that we mentioned earlier that I and Satish are part of, which is an open source hospital management system. JSS was the first NGO hospital to use Bhamni. And if you see, this is a photograph of their patient files, right? JSS is looking after over 3.5 lakh patient records and over 1,500 to 1,600 villages. And you can see that all this data is stored in these paper records, which we slowly sort of started migrating into Bhamni. But the historical data still remains and it is still available in files, and they can sort of magically pull a file up within 15 minutes once a patient shows up at the hospital. But when data is stored in papers, it is harder to use it at scale because it takes time. But once patient data is stored in a USB or on a hard disk with Elasticsearch or a MongoDB or an SQL database on top of it, it becomes exponentially easier and faster to search, becomes exponentially easier to say, show me all the people that have leprosy, show me all the people that live in this area and belong to this caste. And that's the part that is scary. That's the part that is where it is much, much harder to do this on paper, but so much easier and faster to do this with technology. One more interesting recent example is AirTags, right? And most of you may know about AirTags now, but basically what an AirTag allows you to do, Apple AirTag, is that it will allow you to use like a Find My iPhone app or Find My Phone app to find where is the location of the iTag. And the idea was Apple said, hey, listen, if you have a keychain or if you have wallets or if you have your, rucksack, which is important to you, just drop this one there and then you can use your iPhone or a Mac device to be able to find the location when you lose it, which is a helpful use case, I guess. But the problem is what that it has transformed very, very quickly in the year of its release into a tool for stalkers to stalk people, into a tool by robbers to steal vehicles. So they would just like stick this onto in a car and wait for where is the car parked at night before they can go and bring the car. And for $99 you would get like 4 AirTags. And I feel like it is important here again to start thinking about the repercussions and the use cases in which technology will get used, because not everyone has good intentions. And it is important for us to understand that when we unleash useful tech that seems useful, it can have a very potentially negative dark side. And I don't think we want to be associated with or responsible for building tools that are so obviously, going to harm society. So really, I think what we are also saying here is do no harm isn't good enough. I mean, I think I understand that many of us or most of us would not actively want to build software or solutions that will, harm others. But I feel it is not sufficient here, right? What we are trying to say is that it's important to apply 2-4 degree step ahead, think a little bit more, and say how else can this solution be used? What would happen if this is built in a certain manner? Who would suffer or who would be excluded? Those are all things to think about. And it's actually a spectrum, right? It's in a way it's a responsibility spectrum. There is negligence right at the top where you're like, I am building something and I'm not even thinking about it, to I'm building something that is going to be hostile, like surveillance technology, to all the way where we are saying that you can have an I wouldn't say idealistic, but you can start thinking much more holistically about the solutions being built. So step one could be to say, let's build solutions where we will not get sued for building it, so we are protecting our organization. Maybe the second step that most of us have seen is let's protect the client and they make sure that the company that is paying us money to build the software, they are protected. And we have seen that in legal and compliance kind of tries to deal a lot with this area, which is let's not do something where we will get sued and our client will end up paying money, right? And that is why compliance and legal and security in many cases falls in this spectrum of things. Protecting the end customer of the software again falls in that thing. GDPR as an example is protecting the privacy of end customers, right? So that is why it kind of comes in this spectrum. But it is also important to go to the next step, which is holistic well-being of end users of technology. Are we building tools that cause addiction? Are we building tools that make people unwell? Or are we thinking about the betterment of society, of the end users who are using it? Are we being inclusive? Like it is possible that you have like a stock marketing app that only allows a certain class of society to now be able to make use of stock market, make money, and a huge section of the society that doesn't have access to these apps or to these tools, they are cut out. UPI, for instance, has been very inclusive in a way that it's now like India has one of the highest number of digital transactions and UPI has accelerated it. And that is great, right? But earlier, and there are still many applications for stock market, for banking, for investments, which are only available to the really rich. And a lot of such applications are built that allow the rich to get richer while leaving so many people behind. Even if we look at the vaccination use case, right? If you are not digitally savvy, you have to now rely on someone else to be able to book your vaccine. And that had caused a lot of harm to people who were unable to book their vaccines They saw people from other cities come into their villages and get bookings because they could book it, but we were not unable to book it. And being digitally savvy enabled certain people to basically beat the rest. And I feel that this is very important for us to think about. And responsible tech and equitable tech, in a way, is looking at this spectrum and trying to help decisions move more towards the thriving and holistic spectrum, and not just stick to the let's do no harm or let's do the bare minimum to protect our clients and end customers, but we won't think 2 more steps ahead. So ethical funds focus of many customers on whether the brands that they're associating with, are those brands ethical, are they being sustainable, do they care about environment, do they care about society. This has actually accelerated in the recent years, and we feel that it is very important for all of us and the organizations that you work with to remind them that these are not just some things that are supposed to remain in some moral science book or in an ethics curriculum or taught in colleges, but it is something that is now front and center for many businesses to consider. And I'll let Satish speak next on what is the focus of industry and other players on responsible tech, so that you understand that this is actually already semi-mature in a way. Satish, back to you.
Thank you, Gurpreet. I think there are a couple of interesting questions. Chitra asked a question of, if as end consumers we come across companies, indulging in practices that we see are unethical, or asking for information that they probably shouldn't be asking about. What is it that you do, right? And I think Pranjal makes an interesting point about giving them a chance to explain themselves. We could also use social media to attract attention to things that we feel companies shouldn't be doing. I think other thing, as a person who wants to protect your own privacy, one of the things that I would do is be really careful about handing over information like email, for example, or phone numbers, right? Because they're often tools to, even if the company by itself is not, going to misuse your data, they may not necessarily, have the right level of security to protect your data, right? And very often we see data breaches leading to the data of millions and sometimes even billions of people showing up on the internet, and then that's it, right? It's very hard to claw back your information once it's out there. And these days, I think we have options. So, for example, Apple recently introduced a feature with their iCloud service where you can mask your real email, right? And it'll generate aliases in iCloud that are still attached to your email, so you can share that. And then if you find that's been compromised, you just dump it, and you don't have to worry about your actual email getting stolen or being exposed. Another similar service is by DuckDuckGo, which is a privacy-focused search engine. And so they have a very similar service called Email Essentials that you can sign up for. And essentially what that does is each time it detects a field that is asking for an email, you just have to click a small button, and then it will generate a random email ID that again is linked to your email ID. It could be like @duck.com email ID. And you could just use that to protect your real information, right? Sadly, I don't know of any similar service that does this for phone numbers, but being really careful about who you hand over the information to is really something that as end consumers, I think we need to be really careful about. I don't know if Gurpreet, you want to add anything? Yeah.
No, that's true. Actually, in fact, I feel like it's important to not give out your real information as much as possible. So for instance, for date of birth, if you feel like it is not necessary, don't give the real date of birth, right? Like maybe give 5th Jan, something else, and 6th Jan somewhere else, and 7th Jan somewhere else. So I feel like those are, of course, basic ones. The email example is a popular one where there are services that you can actually use, masked or dummy email addresses, and you will then also know if that email address is leaked. You will know which service actually leaked it. So you could say, okay, I signed up for this using this email address. So that's true. But I feel data regulation needs to catch up, and India is now looking at personal data privacy and data laws similar to what GDPR did. I feel like we need to get more involved there in ensuring that the appropriate privacy regulations come in, because then companies will be held more responsible in terms of why they have been collecting certain data, or what are the safeguards and measures they are putting in place to ensure that people's data is not treated carelessly.
So now let's move to what is the industry actually doing about responsible tech, right? And of course, we have been talking a lot about responsible tech, but are people actually doing anything about it? I think is a question, right? If you can move to the next slide, quickly. Yeah. So I think obviously different players are at different levels of maturity about this. So for example, when we looked outside to what some of the other companies similar to us were doing, we found a lot of them are actually thinking about this space, which is a fantastic thing for the industry as a whole. So you can see some tweets from TCS, from a Cognizant, and from called Endava to think about responsible tech. There are reports and insights that companies have published about data ethics, particularly about AI and responsible use of AI and so on and so forth. Right. So people are actively thinking about this, which is a really good trend to see. And then moving on to the next stage, some companies have published a whole bunch of tools and frameworks that allow technologists to learn how to handle specific situations, right? And how to think about these issues, how to think about maybe perhaps even issues that we haven't encountered yet, right? And that's the next stage where talk about tools and frameworks. And in the next part of the presentation, we will talk about a framework or a collection of tools and frameworks across the industry that ThoughtWorks has compiled. So we'll spend a little bit of time on that. And then the stage 2 or stage 3 is where companies, we see some really progressive companies have also started including responsible tech as part of their offerings to customers, right? And of course, again, we're a service company, so perhaps some of the info is biased towards other service companies, but that is something that we are starting to see as well, right? That people and firms think about this as a way to differentiate themselves in the minds of their clients, and offer services perhaps that many of their customers are talking to them about, right? Which is really good news, because not only are we as technologists able to influence our clients, there seems to be a need from clients as well to think more about these kind of issues, right? And if demand is there, then I think the need for companies to have offerings in the space to really integrate responsible tech and ethical thinking into all of the work that they do is going to increase, which I think is only a good sign, right? And not only that, so that is I guess what you would call the demand side, right? I mean, are companies asking for it? What are other companies doing? What are competitors doing, and so on? But the good part is that there seems to be a lot of appetite for people to take this in-house. So if there's a site called All Tech is Human, and again, they are I guess a collective that has been thinking about issues in responsible tech and ethical use of technology, and they're also one of partners of ThoughtWorks. So they have a job opening site, and specifically for responsible tech. And there, if you look through it, I think there are at least 150, 180 job openings specifically in this particular area that clients are and organizations are looking at, right? And you don't invest money, you don't create a specific position unless it is that important, either from lower end of the spectrum, like security, data privacy, and so on, or as a tool to become a more responsible technology firm in general, where you want someone, say, at a leadership level or a middle management level, stewarding specific initiatives like this, right? And I'd say even within ThoughtWorks, we do have a group that is actively thinking about this, not just in India, but also at the global level. And there is a fair amount of support, both at country leadership level as well as globally, for us to think more deeply about this and integrate this into all of the work that we're doing. Right? So I think that's a good segue to stuff that we have done in the past and what is our interest area in this, and what's been our journey thinking about responsible tech. So as an organization, ThoughtWorks has been thinking about many of these issues for, I think, quite some time, right? And even though it wasn't formalized, I would say, our what people know as our social impact work are things that we've been doing, I would say, for at least the last 10, 15 years. Specifically with respect to responsible tech, I would say as a specific thing that we needed to think about, I think I'd say it started roughly about 5 or 6 years ago, where it started with this thing called ThoughtWorks Arts. And ThoughtWorks Arts still exists. I think it's a fascinating experiment that we're doing, though I guess at this point it's no longer an experiment, and it's something that we just do. We started off with an arts residency where we invited a bunch of artists to come and collaborate with us and explored the intersections of tech and society through art. So we had a series of talks, we had art installations. I remember one particular artist, as part of this project, an art residency, they became kind of an android, right? So they had sensors and chips embedded inside their body surgically, and they created art through interacting with the sensors and the data that the sensors were giving them. And there were a whole bunch of other projects. I think more recently we collaborated with an artist who who installed an installation called Riot, and essentially what that installation did was it put the viewer at the center of a potentially dangerous riot situation. And of course, the viewer, their body was embedded with, sensors and, wearables that give data about, heart pressure, blood pressure and, ECG and so on and so forth. And what happened in the scene would really depend on how the viewer's body, sensor measurements change, right? And that is, so each person had a unique experience. So those are the kind of things that ThoughtWorks Arts explored, right? And later in 2017, we actually created a global campaign to explore this more clearly. So we had a whole bunch of talks, we had external experts come and speak. We also created a forum which is still quite active within ThoughtWorks even today, that explores the intersection of ethics and technology. We call this building an equitable tech future, and the beginnings of the responsible tech playbook, which I'll talk about in the next section, kind of got its start as part of the responsible tech campaign. Though the first version of it came out in 2018, where we attempted to put together, I think the good news was even at that time, there were lots of organizations thinking about this. So we attempted to kind of create a handbook of tools that already existed. So that was the first version. And then, in 2021, the second half of 2021, we came out with a revised version of the Responsible Tech Playbook, where, we attempted to make it more accessible to technologists and, how they could use it in their day-to-day, right? So that's kind of where we ended. And I think that's probably a good segue to talk about the Responsible Tech Playbook. So, as I said, the Responsible Tech Playbook is actually something that focuses on practitioners. And, we recognize that, like us, maybe at the beginning of this journey, most people might be like, responsible tech, huh? What is that? And, how do we get started? And then even as you get a sense of, oh yeah, I think I understand what this is, and I think I resonate with what is being said, it often leaves us no wiser about, how can we apply something like this, right? And that's a question that I'm sure many of you have as you listen to Gurpreet and me and to the discussions that we've had. So, the Responsible Tech Playbook is an attempt to help practitioners answer that question, right? And if you look at this, I hope everyone's familiar with the the double diamond model that you see here, and this is probably a typical tech life cycle of a typical tech engagement, right? So you start off with trying to understand what is the problem that you're trying to solve, or what are the opportunities that exist, and then you kind of fan outwards, leave a wide canvas. And then, once you've identified and maybe prioritized what you want to do, then you try and define more narrowly which problems you want to focus on and solve, right? And then you probably then expand outwards again, where you design and come up with a canvas of solutions to solve or address the opportunities that you've identified. And then, once you figured out what it is exactly that you're building, then you kind of converge again, where you deliver the solution that you intend to deliver, right? That's probably called the double diamond. And at each stage of this, there are different types of tools and framework and I guess thinking aids that would help technologists like you and me figure out what questions need to be asked, and what are the guardrails that need to be set with the technology that we're developing, right? And the Responsible Tech Playbook attempts to catalog these and also helpfully give useful information about how it can be applied, and which part of the life cycle they would be most useful on. So for example, some tools would be useful to open up different perspectives and in terms of thinking about either a problem or a solution, right? So they would be more appropriate in the stages of the engagement where you are attempting to broaden the canvas and discover things, right? Certain others may be used to maybe more appropriate when you kind of identify what it is that you want to do, either in terms of the problem that you want to address or the solution that you want to build, and then attempt to mitigate the risks in your chosen problem or solution, or alternatively look at potential dark sides to the solution or feature that you want to build, right? So that's kind of how the playbook itself is organized. We won't attempt to go through all of it, but we will try to give you flavor of the couple of tools. So as you can see, there's a whole bunch of methods and tools, and I think we'll put a link to it on the chat as we go along. But essentially, the whole bunch of tools that attempt to talk about the tool itself and where you could apply these. And I think many of those tools are self-explanatory, but it might help to try and figure out how to get trained to to facilitate some of these conversations, right? And how you do it might vary. So these are a couple of tools that we wanted to highlight. I think the first one is something called the Ethical OS. I think now it's called the Ethical Explorer, where this again is one of those tools that you use to broaden the canvas and think about different aspects of things, right? And it has, broadly 8 risk zones. I think now the newer version probably has a slightly different terminology, I think. But essentially things like, okay, starting from one where you think about truth, disinformation, and propaganda, right? And then you're thinking about risk zone 2 is, addiction and how the tech you're building, is it addictive? Can it cause potential harm to your users or other stakeholders? How does the tech that you're building think about questions related to, structural inequalities like economic and wealth inequalities and asset inequalities, right? Or maybe digital inequalities. Risk zone 4 is about thinking about machine learning and algorithmic biases that are increasingly becoming very important. Risk zone 5 is about data privacy, about surveillance, and how the tech you could be building could potentially be used to target people based on the information that is out there. Risk zone 6 is about data control and privacy and monetization. Who owns your data? Who controls the data that you're creating? And what are the potential harms of, say, maybe increased centralization of this data, or you not having access to data, or being able to collect or correct mistaken information about you that is out there on the internet. Risk zone 7 is about implicit trust and user understanding, and how do technologies and websites and apps that you build, how do they maintain trust with their users, and how do they ensure that that trust is not violated, right? And the implications of it. And risk zone 8 is how are you thinking about your system or the technology that you're building holistically, right? Have you defended against bad faith actors? Have you defended against people that might unwittingly cause harm without knowing, right? And I think the current NFTs blockchain space is rife with I think many of these different risk zones. I don't think we should go into that right this minute, otherwise we'll probably spend the next couple of hours here. But I think if this probably gives you a sense of the canvas of things that you're thinking about when you're talking about broadly about responsible tech, and what are things that could apply. I mean, it is highly possible that not all of these may apply to the tech that you're building or the feature that you're building, but it's possible that some of these may apply, right? And this gives you a structured way to and asks you structured questions about how to be aware and uncover things that you may not have thought about in these 8 risk zones. Gurpreet, you want to add anything to that?
No, I think the previous one is actually pretty interesting. In fact, if you download the kit, it gives you a lot of helpful questions to think more deeply about each one of those areas and how it could help, right? Like when we looked at the Apple AirTag example, right? They could have potentially, looked at surveillance state and looked at what could surveillance measures or risks that could exist, or what would be some of the harmful actors that could misuse it. And I feel like it's a very good way to sort of think a bit broader and think of possible repercussions that could occur on a product or a feature that you're building. Although there could definitely it could be possible that some of them will not be valid, but it ensures there is some level of completeness in thinking about possible risk zones. The data ethics canvas is also an interesting one where you could look at the various data elements that are being stored and try to understand whether are we holding data, are we storing too much data, are we being fearful, and why are we storing various data elements, how could they get potentially misused, or what would be the impact if they are leaked. And it has various lenses that you could use to apply and say that where are all the possible places where things could go wrong, and it's again a good model to apply as a team with your clients, with your team members, or and see what is going on. And you could possibly apply this at the start, but you could also apply this kind of a model in between, where you've got a better understanding of what you're building, but you now want to ensure that that what you're doing doesn't have unintended consequences that could be harmful or inconvenient to either the users or to even the company or to people who are not the users. So we now move a bit to the reflection stage. And I think based on what we've heard till now, right, we've heard about what is responsible tech. We've seen some of the spectrum through which it could travel, right from potentially negligent to hostile to all the way holistic and equitable. And we've seen various examples. I feel it is important to briefly reflect on the work that we are doing today. I'm just checking my internet. It seems to have slowed down. So am I back? I should be back now. Yeah.
We can hear you.
What is the implication of the work that we are doing? How are we approaching it, right? So when we are like part of a proposal team, or when we are part of a new product idea or a new feature, how often do we pause to think about the ethics of it? And some people are naturally attuned to being more ethically upright, and they might be applying it almost every time on a day-to-day basis. But sometimes in the heat of the pressure or heat of the deadline or the excitement, it can be possible to skip through this step. But as we are building features, are we still thinking? Are we correcting? Are we being more responsible and mature about what we are doing things? Also, how often are we asking the question of why? Why am I storing this data? Why am I asking for this field? Why am I building this particular feature? And this why is not just about because someone said it, or because we think, really like asking really the third, fourth degree, questions as to why is it. And I feel it's also important to understand that that being profitable and viable is not at odds with being ethical. In fact, ethics is one of the core topics that is taught in many management colleges, right, about how businesses should be run. A lot of the legal, all the law and the legal society, fraternity is there to uphold ethics and do the right thing. But there are times where society moves forward or backward and the law cannot keep up. And because tech itself is complex and it has this butterfly effect which can ripple through, it becomes hard sometimes for law to keep up. And we looked at that, that study earlier of Facebook, where they went and did a mass experiment on 600,000 people without their consent. It was not illegal, but it was probably unethical. It's very common to go to product management meetings and be recommended this book called Hooked, which talks about how to build habit forming products. But I think it's important to also realize that we shouldn't confuse loyal customers with addicted customers, right? Loyalty is about someone liking your product so much that they feel like it is in their benefit to be using your product, and they agree and align on the values. Whereas when someone is addicted to it, in a way, it has all the same symptoms of a drug withdrawal or a cigarette withdrawal if you do not use it, which means it can lead you to anxiety, it can lead you to depression if you do not get access to it, it can lead you to anger and frustration, it can hook you, it can make you forget about other things. And it's very important to understand that loyalty is not the same as addiction, and we shouldn't be like building addictive products. We have to create valuable products, and they are not the same thing. Some examples of warning signs or potential dark side, right, of features that we would be asked to build or we may have already built. And again, these are examples to make you think. Not every feature will have a dark side, but there are possibilities of dark side, unintended consequences, right? So for instance, if we are building personalization, it could end up in creating echo chambers where we are reinforcing the same message to the user that the user is already believing in, because you're personalizing the news feed or you're personalizing the recommendations so closely to what the person believes in. There is a high chance that the worldview of that person would become very narrow to that tunnel that is being done, right? You could also have privacy loss because you have now stored so much data about a particular person that it is very easy to go all the way back and say that all these attributes actually mean Gurpreet, or all these attributes actually mean it is Satish, right? That's the danger with personalization, the level of data that gets stored, because every human is so unique in surprising ways that to be truly personalized, you truly need everything to know everything about that person, and that's when you start going into the area of data privacy risk or surveillance in that matter. So a lot of these features, and we'll share the slide and the recording are going to be available, have these dark sides, right? That we need to be aware of that could happen. Like in machine learning, besides biases, there is also this inexplainability of an AI algo. And Satish mentioned it briefly earlier also, the fact that if you do not know how an algorithm is taking a decision, you cannot have trust in that anymore. And you do not know whether it is being fair or it is being non-inclusive to a huge section of the society just because it has learned or it has been programmed in a manner. And diverse teams actually can help significantly in reducing these biases and in catching things that you may not think of. Like I mentioned earlier, right? That different regions, different subgroups, different communities have different context, and it is not possible for one person to know about all these. But it is much more easier to say, okay, let's create teams which have representatives from different groups, different genders, different societies, different cultures, and let them make software for the target group, which is also diverse. This was a research done on dark pattern usage in 11,000 e-commerce and shopping websites. And you would see, right, dark patterns are actually a very easy, ethical, slippery slope, right? They are like step one, baby steps towards irresponsible tech, right? Where you're building features or which are actually in a way irritating customers, at best, and harmful to them, at worst, right? In a way. So for instance, signing up, like in your cart, you add a product and then someone else has also added, an 1 year subscription or an insurance or something else along with it into your cart, and now you're being forced to remove it, or you will not see it and later get subscribed. Or your credit card has an automatic recurring payment because which you didn't realize, right? You thought it's a one-time sign up, but it's actually going to get charged 1 year again and again. And this is what the recent RBI guideline has been to protect customers from such fraudulent practices, right? Making it hard to basically disconnect your account or delete your account. And that's again a common strategy in so many websites. You either can't find the button, you can't find the page, or you need to actually write a letter, physically deliver it somewhere before the account will be deleted. But for everything else, they will come at your house, or they will just do it at a phone call in 5 minutes, right? If it takes 5 minutes to sign up, it should not take more than 10 minutes to unsign, but it takes an exponentially longer effort to do that. And we need to be very careful that what is it that we are doing. And by the way, this doesn't just this doesn't just make customers unhappy. It has business implications too. For instance, your call center is at the receiving end of a lot of these phone calls. And the call center person who has done no mistake is gone today morning, happy to their call center. And the first phone call they receive is of an angry customer who has gotten signed up on a credit card that they never paid for. And someone else is getting to hear the repercussion of the decision you just made in a air conditioned room, and it will come and bite us. If you believe in karma, then it comes and bites.
Yeah. Dhruv has a question of asking, how do we deal with situations where maybe we feel some of these are dark patterns, but maybe the client that you work with doesn't feel so, but it may actually be essential to their business, right? How do you deal with something like that? So I would say broadly, and then feel free to pitch in as well. I would say, see, I mean, depending on the business you're in, right? I mean, if you're in a services firm, ultimately the client may have the final say in whether something gets built or not, right? But I think what your responsibility as a technologist is to essentially at least make sure that those conversations happen, right? I mean, it is possible that, the client may think, this is the state of the art and this is how you do things, right? But they may not be aware that this is actually considered a dark pattern, right? And if you have not brought that to the table as a possible, side effect or unintended consequence, that conversation may never happen, right? I mean, it is still possible that you may bring this up, and in the decision that gets taken, they say yes, we are going ahead with it, but at least you've done your bit to have them think about it, right? And next time maybe there's another dark pattern, then maybe they're going to think twice about whether this is a conversation that they need to have, right? And it is possible that in many cases people are convinced, especially if you have data to back it up, about particularly about, say, either customer backlash against dark patterns, or possible pointing to industry research, or saying that best practices recommend that you don't do it, that you will be able to influence your clients or decision makers in the right possible way. But yeah, I think that's the important thing, is having the conversation.
Yeah, and also I feel like this is where examples are very important, right? Examples both of it could be examples where someone got sued for doing something like this, and there are many examples for dark patterns now, especially in the US, where customers have gone and sued companies for dark patterns as a malpractice suit, and those have been accepted. And I feel like this is where reaching out to the company lawyers, reaching out to people who are part of responsible tech communities, asking for suggestions and feedback to say, I think something is going wrong here, but I don't have a good story or a good thread to convince my client. Do you have some examples that I could share, or some points, or can you just come for this meeting and help us understand? I feel like that is how it works. This is the same story with security, right? When we started with security, it was the same problem. Clients were not necessarily able to understand and the gravity of the problem that exists. But after seeing so many hacks and after seeing so many fines being laid down, now to a reasonable degree, security is still given importance. Testing is still given importance. Responsible tech is early in that curve. That's all. The difference is over time, it will, in a way, if you're looking at, Airbnb, we are looking at, self-driven cars. Self-driven cars, already a lot of the ethical and legal ramifications are being played. Who is going to be responsible during an accident? What happens in those cases? It's already in play. Dieselgate, which was famous, yeah, Volkswagen having created software that modifies the output of the engine during an emission test. The developer of the software has been jailed for 4 years, even though the developer wasn't necessarily the person who was decided that we should do this. There were people who were senior to him who would have potentially agreed on in this. And yes, the company has paid billions and is still paying and still getting sued. There are cars in India by Volkswagen, Audi, and Skoda, which all have those converters which have been installed. And India is suing Volkswagen, and it's just a matter of time that more money will be paid by Volkswagen to Indian authorities also. So it's
Not related to that story, Gurpreet. There is somebody came up with this, I think, a build monitor tool called Volkswagen that essentially, identifies if your build is running in a CI environment and makes it pass, right? Whether or not the tests are actually passing or not, and only in your local environment it will fail. And they called it Volkswagen.
That's a good one, actually. This is another very good example from a team in UK, ThoughtWorks, where they use, just like you have safety checks, along with the safety checks as part of the retro and happiness checks, they also have responsible tech check, where people can vote and say if they feel that in this iteration or in this release they see something that they think is ethically concerning or potentially has an unintended consequence, and we need to investigate into it. And I feel like this is a very nice sort of ongoing check that you can ask the teams to say that, do you think there's something that is not being right? Is there something to be thought through? Very similar to how we do a safety check. We could make it anonymous. We could ask people to just like give their numbers and then sense. And if we see that in the room, someone has highlighted an orange or a red, then you would go back and say, okay, we need to research and figure out maybe some of the features we're building now have ethical implications, and see if someone is willing to talk about it, or go back and look, right, rather than just closing our eyes, knowing that there could be issues of, you've seen this slide today. All of you now know that there are certain ethical implications. It's going to be hard to go back and say, no, now I'm not going to be, I'm ignoring it. Your potentially your conscience and your brain will remind you that something Satish and Gurpreet said that day, right? And it looks like something isn't right? Like in a way, like you've taken the red pill today to some degree. Some books to read. There is a good book by Mike Montiaro, who's actually worked with most of the Silicon Valley, biggies, including Google and Facebook and others, and he has given tons of examples and a call out to not just designers. Here he uses designer as a general term to say, if you're someone who's responsible for how a product behaves, you are a designer. And he talks a lot about examples of softwares and systems that have in a way caused significant harm in the last 20 years, and a call out to all designers, engineers and product folks to say that you have to act as gatekeepers, and ethics is not really something that is up for debate.
Another super interesting book is called Weapons of Math Destruction, written by this author called Kathy O'Neill, who was a teacher and then an academic, and she worked on several Wall Street hedge funds, and then later on with several internet companies. And then as she kind of became a data scientist, she recognized these algorithms that were kind of being used everywhere, right? I mean, that was, people were interested in efficiency and automating things and removing humans from the loop. So what they did was applied big data and machine learning and AI to automate decisions for them. But the unintended consequences of these, particularly to people who had no recourse to challenge a decisions that was being made algorithmically, I think was devastating. So in one of the examples, she highlights this particular software that was being used to grade teachers in one of the US school districts, right? And the only metric that algorithm was using was how much students improved on standardized tests year over year, and completely failed to take into consideration pretty much any other metric, like for example, how well teachers are being graded or liked by their students, or feedback from parents or anything like that, right? And in fact, some of the students who were special needs children, or children from difficult backgrounds, obviously when they moved from year to year because of their personal circumstances, they they couldn't perform as well as the previous year, for example, right? And therefore, some of the teachers that were considered really good ended up actually being fired because of a system of an algorithm that really had no accountability, no transparency in terms of the decisions that were being made, right? And she goes on to catalog a whole bunch of these and calls out the key problems that we need to be aware of when deploying such algorithms on mass scale. She talks about a lot of social software, or software that's, say, for example, used to screen resumes, or give out approving loan approvals or rejections, right? Many of those are automated, and sometimes there's absolutely no accountability to whether person that's been rejected gets a chance to know why, or if some person's data is stored wrongly, they don't really even have a place to go and correct it, right? And such is the pervasive nature of all of these. I think it's a fascinating read. Highly recommend all of you read this. Close, Gurpreet.
So this is our CTO Rebecca Parsons actually, gave this quote, and we think that I think this is a good slide for us in a way to end at. And I think it's important to understand that unlike doctors and medical professionals across the world, our industry doesn't have an analog to the Hippocratic Oath, and we need to consider what responsibilities we have to those who use the technology that we build, as well as those who are invisible during this process, people who are our users of software, as well as people who are not the users of our software. And this quote is there in the Responsible Tech Playbook. The idea really here that we wanted to convey today is that software is core and central to our lives now. We have already seen significant impact, negative impact of social media on the political process and democratic process across countries. Riots and political wars have been lost and won through technology, and there have been significant negative consequences of softwares and systems that are being built. And these big systems feel like they are potentially like flowing by themselves, but if we all are playing a small role in it, and we have to be conscious of the role that we play and potentially stand up as gatekeepers to ensure that our name doesn't go on top of softwares and solutions that potentially cause harm or potentially make people inconvenienced or unhappy, depressed, anxious, or downright get hurt from the decisions we are taking. Thank you, and feel free to talk to us, reach out to us, and follow some of the ThoughtWorks events and talks on responsible tech and social impact and technology in general. And some of the other organizations that we mentioned, I feel you should go and check it out, or the books that were also mentioned. They all will lead to some very interesting organizations and efforts which are underway in this space. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Satish. Thank you, Gurpreet, for a wonderful session.
Thank you.
Before we leave, I'll just like to ask everyone to fill in the feedback form. I've dropped it once again in the Zoom chat. All right, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.